it's noon, so we're going to go ahead and get started so that we can stay on time. Hello, my name is Erica Cherno, and I'd like to welcome you to our Edible Gardening Seminar Series, of which this is the 5th talk. Questions will be handled at the end of the talk, but feel free to put any questions in the Q&A box at any time. I will coordinate these questions. Also, for today's talk, closed captioning is available. It can be turned on or off with the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Our speaker today is Richard Gordon, who will talk about planting and growing fall and winter vegetable gardens. Richard has been an OSU Lane County Master Gardener since 2022. In addition to the Edible Gardening Group, he has been active in answering questions in our plant clinic and mobile plant clinic and helping with our plant sale as well. Our next and last talk for the seminar series will be on Monday, August 26th at noon, when we will provide information on growing culinary herbs. We hope you will join us for that seminar. And with that, I hand it over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Welcome, everybody, to Fall and Winter Vegetable Gardens. And thanks for attending my Zoom presentation today. Well, you probably have lots of questions about fall and winter gardens, and here are some of them that might be popping up in your head. When to plant, what to plant, what seeds can you start inside, and what seeds should you start outside? And what transplants will work well? And do raised beds work well in a fall garden? And what works especially well in Willamette Valley Zone 8B? Everything I say today will be based on the assumption that you're growing vegetables in Zone 8B in the Willamette Valley, but you can adjust them if you're someplace else as well. And how do you take care of a fall vegetable garden? And what about days to maturity? How do you figure out how many days before the plant is going to be ready to be harvested? Gardeners like cool seasons. And here's some of the reasons why. There are fewer insects in the fall to eat your vegetables. And there's more rainfall, which means you probably have to worry about watering less. And also there are fewer problems with weeds, and lots of vegetables grow very well in west of the Cascade Mountains. And some vegetables taste a lot better after they've had some cool weather in their growing. So here's the main choices you're going to be needing to make. Do I sow directly into the garden, or do I sow indoors and then transplant later? And that will depend. Should I go for a fall, winter, spring, or summer harvest? Some of the vegetables we'll be talking about today can be planted for in the early spring to be harvested in the summer, and then that same vegetable could be planted in the mid or late summer to be harvested in the fall. And what cultivars work best? There are some cultivars that will be especially suited for fall gardens. And will I need to cover the vegetables or use a cloche to keep them from freezing or getting too cold, and just to keep them warm? Those are some of the major decisions. What can't grow well in a fall or winter garden? Tomatoes, eggplants, peppers. You probably all recognize these as things that you see in your summer gardens growing well. Cucumbers, melons, squash. And remember again, we live in Zone 8B in the Willamette Valley. And for that effect, the average first frost date is October 26th. So as you can see already, this is all about timing. You're going to need to do some planning in order to make sure you get things in the ground or in the greenhouse in the right time so that you can harvest them or transplant them at the right time. There are, like I said before, there are cool season crops that you can sow in the early spring for a summer harvest. Those exact same vegetables are fine sometimes for a midsummer to early fall planting to harvest in the late fall. However, as you see, there's both the same vegetables in both these groups. And I will warn you now that a lot of the brassicas, the broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage family, they are often not very tolerant to heat. So although they're listed here for planting in the fall or midsummer to late fall, midsummer to early fall, they may not be so appropriate for fall gardens when you're direct sowing outside. We'll talk more about that later. Oops. Oh. Okay. I got to go back to my. So here are some of the catalogs and pieces of information that may be helpful. And today I'm going to be mainly using the Territorial Seed Company Fall and Winter Catalog to guide us. And I recommend that. And here's a couple of ways you can either get it by emailing them or sending them or calling them and asking them to send you a fall and winter catalog. Lots of very good information, well organized, and of course, you could buy your seeds from them. So in your planning, one of the places you're going to go for information about what to plant and when to plant is just right on the seed packet. On the front and the back of the seed packets, there's information on what grows well and when you should plant, when you should harvest, days to germination, and what zones in the country it's best suited for. Here's another good piece of information for fall and winter gardens. This is a winter gardening chart, and it's inside the seed Territorial Seed Catalog, and it shows you the best dates to sow, the best dates to transplant, and the best dates to harvest. And you also will see there in October, it says you might need to put a cover over some of these vegetables to protect them from cooler weather in the fall. You're going to notice that climate change is giving us a lot of questions about all of these planting and harvesting dates. And so nobody is totally sure exactly what date to plant or harvest, but these are our best guidelines here. And you'll have to just watch the weather and watch your plants to determine how accurate they are. Here's, like I said, read the back of the seed packet. There's lots of good information there. It tells you what zone that they can be planted in, what the germination temperature should be. I recommend buying a soil temperature thermometer. And the seed packet also tells when to plant, days to maturity or harvest, and whether to plant as seeds or starts, and whether to start inside or outside, and how deep you should plant things, and how far apart. Here's another seed packet, and this one shows a little map showing you what months would be best for starting your seeds. So for direct sowing in July or August for a fall harvest, you need to know about how many days to harvest and days to maturity. what the soil germination temperature is, and you need to keep the seeds evenly moist. And you may need to use a cloche or a cover in October to keep things from getting too cool. For direct sowing, there's a few things to keep in mind. Soil preparation involves working the soil, putting some compost in, keeping the soil well drained, and making sure your pH for the soil is correct. Most of these garden vegetables do well in pHs between 6 and 7, and we recommend testing your soil every year. And that can be done through the Lane County Extension Service. For those of you that live in Lane County, in the fall or in the spring, we do soil testing. You need to rake those amendments into the soil, into your seed bed, and put your fertilizer in a little bit deeper than your seed will be planted. Plant your seed to the appropriate depth. Cover the seed with soil or vermiculite or some sifted compost and water things in, and keep your seeds evenly moist. Thin your seeds when there are 1 or 2 sets of true leaves on your new shoots. So, like I said, amend your soil, use fertilizer, compost, mulch, and protect your plants from getting too hot as well. Mulch can help with that. So, planting from seed, if you start your seeds outdoors, plant them a little deeper than you would in the spring, because your soil will be moister and cooler an extra inch or 2 down in the ground. We do not recommend using bluebells, although they're pretty, they're invasive, and the seeds will spread all over your vegetable garden. So we don't recommend those bluebells that are in the picture there. And here's some examples of some of the best things that work well in a fall garden. Leeks, lettuce, mustard greens, radishes, rutabaga, Swiss chard, turnips, Asian greens, beets. And then again, like I said, the brassicas, questionables, but some people do have success with those in the fall. Carrots, cauliflower, again, a brassica, collards, kale, and kohlrabi. These are things you can direct sow in July or August for fall gardens. So I'm going to just go through a few examples of some of the things, specific cultivars that grow well in a fall garden when you're direct sowing. Beets, this is an early wonder tall crop top. It harvests in 45 days, and it can be sown anywhere between June and August for a fall crop, but it's not good for transplanting because of the roots on it. Any of your Asian greens will do well in the fall. And here's an example of some of them. This is one, a Napa cabbage that harvests in 64 days and can be planted in germination temperatures between 45 and 75 degrees. And you can sow directly this seed between July and mid-August. So you're right on time for watching this Zoom presentation today for getting started planting your fall garden. This harvest in 64 or 84 days. I'm not sure. Anyway, gourmet greens do well in the fall gardens. They like cooler temperatures, and they might even tolerate some moderate frost. If you could use a remay or grow guard cover if you have some cool weather. And you can continue to sow them every couple of weeks, so you have a continual supply of fresh salad greens all fall and into the early winter. Here's a lettuce called Winter Density that harvests in 54 days. Plant every 2 or 3 weeks to extend your harvest. And you might have to use a cold frame or a cloche, and you can direct sow this as well. Soil germination temperatures between 40 and 80, but it likes the cool weather. Here's a broccoli. Like I said, be careful with this because they do not tolerate heat well. But some of you may be adventurous. It's a big science experiment. You might want to try growing some broccoli or cauliflower, both brassicas, in the fall and see what you do. I recommend sowing them indoors in a greenhouse and then transplanting them after 4 or 6 weeks. Russian kale, 55 days to harvest. So in June or July, right now is a good time. And it's a nutritious antioxidant, very healthy for you. And here's one with a long harvest season, days to harvest. I mean, 105 days from the time you plant it to harvest, but it can be planted in temperatures up to 85 degrees. And you have your soil, nice, good soil, pH 6 or 7. Dig a trench 5 inches deep. And as they start to grow, keep putting in soil around them to blanch and increase the length of the white part of the leek. And choose a variety or a cultivar that grows well in the summer. And that's 14 to 16 hours of summertime daylight. And that's what some of those cultivars really like. And you can thin them, grow them in this one. You might want to thin them out once and just leave the strongest plants thin to the strongest plants when they're 4 or 5 inches tall. Here's another good variety, 60 days to harvest for Swiss chard. It's, again, a very healthy antioxidant, and you can direct sow mid-spring through summer, and they will even overwinter in mild climates if you use a crop cover or a cloche. Radishes are a quick one. 25 days to harvest. Sow them in mid-August to mid-September for a fall harvest. Oregon sugar pods number 2, 70 days to harvest. Sow the peas right now in July for a fall crop, and some of them may overwinter in mild climates. Multiple sowings to extend your harvest. And here's a root vegetable, long one, 110 days to harvest. Sow in mid-June to July for a winter harvest. Then when they're 4 inches high, and row covers when their temperatures get cool. Another root vegetable, Adana carrots, 58 days. Sow mid-June to July for a fall or winter harvest. They taste better after there's been a frost. So, and you want to thin them when they're 4 inches tall. Here's a little white snow pea, only 30 days to harvest. Some of them can overwinter in a mild climate. And here's the onion and garlic and family. And these you plant in mid-September to October, and they will overwinter. So they'll be in the ground all winter long and harvest in the spring or next summer. Here's an unusual one called jacaranda. It's a kind of broccoli. It has a high level of anthocyanin in it, which makes it more resistant to additional moisture and rots in the winter rains. So it's a beautiful purple sprouting broccoli. There are also purple cauliflower and kale. So what I'd like you to do when you're planting your garden is make a chart, something like this. What plants do I want to direct sow right now? And then a column that says dates. When do I want to plant these doors? How many days until harvest? And what will be the harvest date? Now, remember, for most of these, average frost date is October 26th. So for most of these, you're not going to want to plan on harvesting things after the 26th, but there will be some things that will do well. Here's what my plan looks like for this fall, and I'm just starting to plant and sow things right now. So these are direct sow vegetables. I plan to sow the Napa cabbage. Oops. Let me see if I can go back. I plan to sow the Napa cabbage on August 1st. It needs 64 days to harvest. And my plan for harvest date is October 3rd. There's some gourmet greens. Plan to sow them on September 15th, and then days to harvest October 13th. And as you can see, I've been very ambitious here. I plant scallions, parsnips, Bavarian purple garlic, shallots. Those will both overwinter. The garlic and the shallots will overwinter. And then I've got my little purple snow pea, which can be harvested in October 22nd. Now, one thing to think about when you're planting things in the fall, the days are going to get shorter and shorter, and the temperatures are going to start cooling down. So these are approximate harvest dates. You may need an extra couple of weeks sometimes for these to harvest because the weather is cooler and the days are shorter and there's less sunlight. So just be flexible, watch the weather, watch your plants, and plan accordingly. Again, this is my ambitious plan for fall gardens. I've got scallions here, 2 different kinds, and the purple one, the one that has purple bulbs on the bottoms, can overwinter and be harvested in the spring. There's also a Alcosa cabbage, which is a Savoy cabbage, harvest at the end of October. Brussels sprouts, different kinds. Yes, they're a brassica, and they may not do so well in the fall if it's really hot, but some of you might want to try either Brussels sprouts or broccoli in your fall garden. Also, there are some herbs that will do well. A dark green Italian plain parsley will do well, and cilantro. There's some cultivars of cilantro that you can plant now or in August, and they'll harvest in the fall. And some of them, because it's cooler weather, they won't go to seed so fast. So you'll get long harvest seasons when you can keep clipping leaves off them. So for transplanting for a fall garden, like I said, the brassicas will do better. The broccoli, the Brussels sprouts, the cabbages, the cauliflowers, those are all things that love the cooler weather and even taste better in the fall. Here's some other things to transplant. You can transplant some fennel, leeks, lettuces, and radicchio. It's kind of a chicory. And to do that, you're going to need to start those seeds indoors in a greenhouse or a closed-in front porch with glass or someplace where they can stay warm and get started in a nice, cooler, temperature-controlled environment. So make sure your pots are sterilized and your soil is sterile. 3 or 4 seeds in a pot. Keep them evenly moist. Put a propagation dome over them while their seeds are emerging, and then maintain the soil temperature and sun. You're going to need to thin the cells or pots to the strongest plant as they start to grow. It may be important to make sure you've got enough airflow, and you might want to encourage your indoor seedlings with some quarter strength fertilizer on their leaves or some in their potting medium. So just something to think about. Transplanting. Transplant them when they're well developed but not root bound. And then when you're transplanting them to outside, give them a chance for a few days to get used to the cooler temperatures and the full sun of outdoors. And you might want to be taking them in and out each day to get them used to those as they're hardening off. And again, be aware that in a rainier part of the year that you might want to space your plants a little farther apart so that you don't have any damage from being too close and not getting enough airflow in between the plants. Here's an example that's good for transplanting. Ensure that, here's the one we were talking about, ensure adequate spacing to prevent fungal disease and pests. And you might want to transplant this plant 4 to 6 weeks before your anticipated transplant date. So you got to kind of count backwards from your harvest date to this. Cover the seeds with loose vermiculite or sifted compost, water evenly, and work some fertilizer in. Here's a sprouting sprouting broccoli, purple broccoli. It doesn't like extreme heat. You need to transplant 4 to 6 weeks. You need to put indoors 4 to 6 weeks before you transplant it outside. And then when you move it to your permanent transplant site outside, you move it to a well-limed location. Make sure you've tested your soil pH. You can start this in the autumn for overwintering varieties, May to June for transplanting, and June to August. Brussels sprouts. This is a long harvest season, 125 days. So you need to start at 4 to 6 weeks before your anticipated transplant date. Here's a good chart that I found in the Territorial Seed Company catalog for fall and winter gardens. The little green line indicates when to start it indoors. The black line on the chart shows you the months when you can transplant it. And the red line on to the right side shows you approximate times to harvest. So you can see there's some flexibility here, but it gives you an idea of when you're planting your broccoli cultivars and how they're different. They're not very different, but there are some differences. Here's a cauliflower. Doesn't like extreme heat. Do not direct sow for fall planting. Make sure you put this indoors in between May and July for transplanting in June to August. And it has a reliable white flower. Here's a beautiful picture of it, and you can see how white it is because it had these big leaves overlapping the cauliflower, keeping it very clean and protecting it from the sun. Here's another one of those charts for cauliflower, for different cultivars of cauliflower. And again, there aren't a lot of differences, but the green lines indicate when to start it indoors, and then again, when to transplant it and harvest it. So here's a scallion. You can put 10 or 12 seeds in a pot, start it inside. If the tops reach over 5 inches long, cut them down to 3 inches before you transplant them. And when you are transplanting them, separate them very gently so as not to disturb the roots, and put them in a shallow trench. And then you'll fill the trench with around the seedlings and water them in well. Here's a long harvest vegetable, 250 days to harvest. So obviously this is going to overwinter. And it's interesting because it's what they call photoperiodic. In its early stages, when there's lots of sun in the summertime, it's going to put all its growth into its leaves above the ground. As the length of the days shortens, it transitions and puts all of its energy into growing a bulb, which, like I said, takes 250 days till harvest. Here's some fall herbs that may do well for you. Dark green Italian parsley, 80 days to harvest. Now, with all these vegetables that are fall harvest vegetables, like I said, you're going to need to watch them and take into consideration, because of the shorter days, less sunlight, and cooler temperatures, you may need to adjust your plan. Here's coriander or cilantro. It resists bolting because it's growing in cool temperatures. So here's something to think about. Like I said, for transplant timing, adjust the days to maturity, days to harvest that are in your catalog or your seed packet for fall and winter harvesting. You may need to add as much as 2 or 3 weeks to account for the slower growth due to shorter days. And the days that are indicated on the seed packet or in the catalog are calculated from the transplant date, not from the inside seed starting date. So date to maturity, add 2 or 3 weeks, and that's stated on the back of the packet from the transplant date, not from the indoor seed sowing date. Here's an example of how I did my calculations for red Russian kale. The seed packet says it harvests in 55 days, but I'm going to add 21 days to that in my planning because I'm growing it in the fall. So seed indoors between August 11th and September 1st, and transplant it on September 1st for 55 days to harvest it around October 25th. Your date to maturity or date to harvest is October 25th. So you've added 21 days in there. Here's another example. The cauliflower twister that I showed you, the white cauliflower, it says on the catalog it is 62 days to harvest, but add a few extra weeks because you've got fall cool weather and shorter days. So it should be indoors from seed from August 10th to August 31st, and then transplanted for an additional 62 days starting September 1st, and you'll harvest it November 1st. So again, you need to make a separate chart or planning table for things you're going to seed indoors and then transplant outdoors. And I recommend you making one of those and then calculating the dates to your harvest. Here's my harvest, my ambitious transplant dates and indoor seed sowing dates for red Russian kale, bell star broccoli, a kind of Brussels sprouts, a red cabbage called ruby ball, the cauliflower twister, collards, and bok choy. So all of those you can start indoors, leave them indoors for 3 weeks or more. When they are ready to transplant, you've got your transplant date, put them outside, and then begin your days to harvest countdown. So here's some ways you can extend your growing season. Hoop houses, cold frames, cloches, greenhouses, mulch, plastic mat mulch, row covers. So all of these are different ways to give you a little extra time for your plants to mature if the weather turns cool. Here's some examples of row covers that do the same type of thing. They can also be used to warm your soil in the spring. Grow Guard 20 and Remay are the two that I'm familiar with. Here's some cloches and cold frames. You need to make sure that during the day you open them up so that you don't cook your plants that you're trying to keep warm overnight. And here's the poor man's version of a cloche, just a plastic juice bottle with the bottom cut out, placed over your plant in its early stages, and it protects from the cold weather and also from insects. So here's some examples of different fruits of your labors. These are some of the things you're going to be able to harvest in the late fall and from your fall garden. If you're really brave and adventurous, you might try some winter garden as well. Here's some vegetables that will withstand heavy frost between 28 degrees Fahrenheit, below 28 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you're really adventurous, there's quite a variety here. Here's some semi-hardy vegetables for winter gardens that will hopefully survive between 28 and 32 degrees. Here's even some things you can plant from seeds in February. So that's, again, very ambitious and adventurous. And winter gardens, transplants in February sometimes. People try this. Arugula, cabbage, carrots, kale. These are all things that could be started inside and then transplanted in February for a harvest in late spring or early summer. So you've got lots of choices, lots of vegetables to think about and things to grow. You've got everything from lettuces that harvest in 25 or 30 days to onions that take 200 days to harvest. So just whatever is interesting to you and looks like you'd like to try, I wish you a lot of luck with your fall and winter garden. Here's some bibliography for you. And And of course, OSU Extension Center has lots of articles online that you can access through the computer and the internet, and have extensive information about fall and winter gardens. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about fall and winter gardens, and I've also, of course, learned lots in the process as well. So thanks very much, and good luck with your fall and winter garden.
Thank you, Richard. I have one question. If there's other questions, go ahead and type them into the Q&A box. There's one in there right now. It's asking, is the Territorial Seed Company winter gardening chart based on Zone 8B?
Yes, it is, because Territorial Seed Company is down in Cottage Grove, and they kind of focus on Zone 8B for where they market their seeds and where they are giving you information for. And there are several, like I said, there's a whole page on fall and winter gardening basics. There's that seed chart, and there are those other tables about planting and harvesting charts. Those are all based for Zone B, Willamette Valley. And you'd have to make adjustments if you're doing things outside that area, but that's the focus for Territorial Seed Company. You'll be surprised when you get their catalog. It's very well done, and provides lots of good information.
There's a question if you have recommendations for other zones, and I would just say contact your local extension office. For example, in Oregon, OSU Extension has planting charts for this specific Northwest region. So I would suggest contacting your local extension office, or look for seed companies that are more local to your region.
Yeah, there are other seed companies that are focused on the Willamette Valley as well. I just happened to choose this one because I thought their catalog was so informative, but there are several other good companies you can buy from that focus on Willamette Valley, Zone 8B.
Okay, another question is, which of these vegetables are absolutely best planted for fall, winter, or beyond because the heat hits them too hard?
Because they keep what?
Because there's a lot of heat at the time. The heat hits them too hard. I think what she means is there's a lot of heat at the time of planting in August. I can speak on this a little, but I'll let you go first.
Yeah,
Richard.
well, I would say consider starting indoors, because that's a good way to control your temperature. And if you start some vegetables indoors, then you're more able to control your vegetables, and you don't have to put them outdoors until the weather cools off. So that's one solution to that problem. And then, of course, the others is, I would say, look at individual cultivars, because they will tell you on the seed packet and in the catalog which ones do not tolerate the heat and which ones like the cool weather. It's right in the catalog and on the seed packet. What did you have?
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll add to that. For example, broccoli. Broccoli can be grown in the spring or in the fall, winter time. And they will often note on the seed packets if the variety is suited for spring growing. And by spring growing, it means that you're probably starting them in really cold winters. And then after they're transplanted, they're growing through the spring into the hot summer months. So those are varieties that have been bred for that type of condition. There are, for example, broccoli varieties that are more suited for growing in the winter, fall. And those have been bred to be started in the hot days of summer and then continue growing as we move into the shorter days and colder days of fall. So Richard is right. You do have to just look at the individual cultivars and look for one that is well suited for fall and winter gardening. There's also a question about whether there are any potato varieties that can be grown in fall, winter. I don't know any off the top of my head. Do you, Richard?
I have not seen that mentioned as a fall or winter crop.
Yeah. I'd be worried about harvest time and rot. But you'd have to check seed catalogs to look for something that's well suited for that. Yeah, someone else noted that some seed packets say frost tolerant, so that is something else you can look for as well. On seed packets to know that they will be able to handle those frost dates in October and November.
And then don't forget your cloches and your row covers. You know, they will extend your growing season into the later fall. Any other questions?
Any other questions? I don't see any in the Q&A. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Feel free to reach out with further questions. And as I noted, the culinary herbs webinar will be on August 26th at noon. You can find the link to sign up on our OSU Extension Lane County website in the events calendar. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.